Pleasant good morning, everyone. Well, I should say all protocols being observed. As I was listening this morning to both Peter and Rodden and listening to who you had as your keynote speakers in your previous conferences, I was thinking this is either a very great honor for me or the beginning of a very funny joke. But let me just say that I do take it as a great honor. From where I sit at the Caribbean Development Bank, I see our region, we have a lot of challenges. And we witnessed those challenges in a real way just last week with Hurricane Dorian and what it did to Bahamas. So I also want to pay a special tribute to the people of Bahamas. I know that all of us in this room are standing with them in solidarity. And like I was saying to Marla just this weekend, we are trying our best to help them out this time at CDB. So today I'm going to discuss with you a little bit about what digital currencies could mean for us in the Caribbean. But more importantly, I'll also discuss with you around the Caribbean Settlements Network and how I see that playing out and the potential benefits of that will have for us as well. So when I was thinking about doing this presentation for this BIT conference, recently I was on some study leave, and on that study leave, the professor was saying, don't forget that cash flow is king. And I said, okay, that's great. And so that's why I have that slide up there. I actually want to say to you that digital flow is queen. And this is what I'm actually going to speak with you about. Now, I hope many of you understand what I'm trying to say here, that the queen is really at the top of the food chain. While we might think that cash flow is king, I think that what's happening with respect to digital is moving us to where we really want to be. And the queen is really the true monarch. So here's my outline of the presentation this morning. I'm going to speak with you a bit about Caribbean economy, what's happening, give you a snapshot of some of the challenges that we're facing, then speak with you about the Caribbean Settlements Network and the role that digital currencies could be playing, and then finally, how I see that fitting in with respect to Caribbean development. So it's important for us to understand that we don't just live in the Caribbean, we're living in the globe. And currently we have these challenges that we are facing. Here we can see waves of nationalism, military tensions and mass migration, the growing role of China, as well as the evolving financial regulatory system. And recently, as I decided to look at this slide a little bit more detail, I thought that we needed to really add this final piece to it, which is the growth of digital currencies and perhaps cryptocurrencies as well. And we in the Caribbean need to be aware that this is an important aspect of our daily lives that we need to be cognizant of. Next slide, please. Now, for me, if I could just have one slide for this presentation this morning, this would be it, which says that over the last 2 decades or so, on average, our incomes in the Caribbean were actually above the global average. But something has happened since 2016. Our GDP per capita has now dipped below the global average. And folks, for me, and I'm not sure if for you, but I hope it would be for you as well, this is a call for us to turn things around. Now, one of the reasons why I had no hesitation in answering the call to give this speech this morning was because I know of the challenges that we face in the Caribbean. And we have very few green shoots, but I think that the work that BIT is doing in this region gives us an opportunity, as Peter was saying, to help us leapfrog. And I think that this work on digital will allow us, if we get it right, to get back to where we should be. Because ladies and gentlemen, when we do the projections, if we stay on this current trajectory, by 2050, the Caribbean will be the poorest region in the world. And we don't want that. Can I have the next slide, please? So last year we produced a report called A Blueprint for a Sustainable Caribbean Economy. And in that blueprint, we tried to summarize what are the challenges that we are facing. And we've summarized those in 4 quadrants here. The macroeconomics, and here it's quite self-explanatory. We unfortunately have very low growth rates, high debt levels. Then we have productivity and competitiveness. I'll show you another slide that shows you how challenging it is to do business in the Caribbean. On human development, while we have made great progress since the years of independence, we are starting to see some drops. We still have too many people living in poverty in the region, and many of our young people are unemployed. That 4th quadrant there on the environment, well, I don't think I need to say much more to you. We saw the effects of that only last week. But at the bottom of this, there's a real implementation gap. You know, I can tell you that we at the Caribbean Development Bank, we approve a lot of loans, but a lot of the money doesn't go out the door. And that's not good for banking. We almost have about $750 million, $1 billion of undisbursed balances. And that's simply because projects cannot be implemented. I want to say to you here that this is a problem that I think maybe digital could assist us with. And also we have a regional approach gap. Folks, let me be honest with you. Some of our countries are quite small, and while small can be great, but as Rodan was saying in his presentation, if we want to go further, I think we can do this together. I think for too often I hear about this regional integration not happening. Why is the CSME not happening? It makes complete economic sense for us to do things together. Think about it. If we had one Caribbean economic space, things would be a lot better. Now, I know that, of course, we are separated by waters, and that makes, of course, the cost of government a bit more expensive. But there are other ways that if we were to come together, it could be a lot better. And I'm sure that many of the business people in this room would agree with that. So let me go over to the next slide. Now, I thought it would be useful for you to see how some of our board member countries in the Caribbean have been doing. And this is the 2018 data. So Anguilla had this really, really good growth in 2018. And that's, of course, they were recovering from the hurricanes of 2017. Antigua did particularly well. But you see that 3rd country there, Grenada? Grenada, for me, is a real poster child. If anyone remembers that in 2004, Grenada was hit by Hurricane Ivan and went through a really difficult period. Then, new government came in 2013 and decided to implement reforms, similar to what we are seeing happening here in Barbados. And that growth rate, that's the average growth rate that they have been having over the last 5 years or so. So reforms are important. A point I want to make here this morning is that it's important for us to continuously reform so that we can have these types of growth rates. Because this is the type of growth rate we need to see emulated across the region if we are going to avoid the trap that we're currently on, which is that we're likely to be the poorest region of the world by 2050 if things don't turn around. So in 2018, our countries on average only grew by 2%. A 2% growth rate is not good enough if we want to take people out of poverty. Because, of course, we're adding to our populations. And, of course, if our economies are only growing by 2%, then our bright young people will want to leave and find opportunities elsewhere. So I think that insisting that our governments reform and that we have the right doing business environment so that we have higher growth rates is going to be critical for us in the medium to short term. You just change that, please. Now, this slide, I think, is also important. We have been declining with respect to our doing business scores. As you can see there, in 2009, we ranked 81 out of about 181 countries. And now, 10 years later, we're ranked 126 out of 191 countries. Folks, this is not good enough, because, let me tell you, there are some countries, some places in conflict in the world right now that have a higher ranking in this doing business indicator than some of our Caribbean countries. So our average is 126. The Gaza and West Bank is 116. Folks, time for us to wake up. We got to change. So let me just switch over. And like I mentioned before, we have high levels of unemployment. About 1 in 4 of our young persons are unemployed. And in some of our countries, that's as high as 40%. Now, any economist can tell you that the longer you stay out of the labor market, it's going to be much more difficult for you to ever get into that labor market. And so that statistic is also driving what we're seeing on the right side of this slide, with high crime rates as well. Homicide rates are quite high. In Little St. Kitts and Nevis, you have a high homicide rate of about 56 per 100,000. It's one of the highest in the world. Now you could imagine having that in a small space. It brings a lot of citizen insecurity. You can change for me, please. Now, as I go through this presentation, I think it's also important for us to reflect on what's happening globally. And population trends are really important for us. I want to make a call here to, if there are any politicians in the room, or rather, I know you're a senator, but I don't consider you a politician. But maybe you can advocate for us to have longer time horizons. We seem to do things in 3 to 5 year time horizons. But when we look out globally as the population trends, this is what we're seeing. So as you can see, in 1950, North America had about 7% of the world's population, and Europe had about 10%. You change that slide for me. In 2017, this is how the population is shaking out. And if I project out to 2100, this is what we're seeing. The reason why I put this slide up for you is that we need to be aware of the trends that's happening around us. So currently, as you know, there's a big pivot towards Asia because of the large populations there and the huge markets. But if you look at that slide, it would also tell you that we also have to be thinking of a continent that's pretty closer to home. Maybe just 4 hours away by flight from Barbados if we were to fly from here to Ghana. So that by 2100, the African continent is likely to have about 40% of the world's population. And when we do the numbers, remember those growth trajectories that I was speaking with you about? That population is going to be very young and have a high income as well. So I really want us to consider what are our strategies going to be going forward. This is looking out to 2100. Please switch. Now, closer to home, we also have a significant challenge. When we do the population projections out to 2100, many of our countries are seeing significant declines in population, and that's due to low birth rates, migration happening. So if you look at Jamaica there, the population is expected to decline by 50%. And if you do the maths around that, you know what that would mean for public expenditure, for dependency ratios, for pensions. And it's not only Jamaica that needs to be concerned. Trinidad and Tobago, the population is likely to decline by 28%, Dominica by 22%, and even here in Barbados, we're expecting a population decline of 10%. Now, whenever I visit Trinidad and I'm there and I hear many commentators speaking about the influx of migrants, I sometimes say to them, when you look at these population numbers, I'd be very happy to have migrants coming in because you need the migrants. And I think now, I think that for many of our countries, this is going to be true, but we also need to encourage the free movement of people within our region. And later on, when I come to speak about the digital currencies and CSN, you will see what I mean about that. You switch for me, please. Now, of course, this slide is self-explanatory. You know, we have visitors every year who come to see us. And I don't know why we give these visitors so much respect by giving them names. So Dorian and Maria and Irma, they don't bring any gifts that we like. But the reality is that we are in a very vulnerable part of the world, and we have to think constantly about how we build resilience. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've tried to show you here some of the challenges that we face in the region. And now I will try to give you an outline as to how I believe digital and move towards digital currencies and the Caribbean Settlements Network can help us with our development objectives. As you can see, we have many challenges, but I think we can overcome them if we work smart. Now, in the region, intra-regional trade is critical to Caribbean development. And currently, when we look at all of the exports and import activities that we do in Caribbean countries, the intra-regional trade, and this is the wider Caribbean, accounts for about 12% of the total, or about 3.4 billion. Now, I'm not just focusing on CARICOM here, this is the entire Caribbean region. But if it was just CARICOM, that number maybe declines by about 1 billion US. That's a significant amount of trade that's going on. And so when we think about something like a Caribbean Settlements Network, we can now think about the opportunities for us within this particular market. Change for me, please. And this is just another slide that shows you that share of trade within the CARICOM region. Change for me, please. So, however, when I speak about this, cross-border policy changes are needed to further deepen regional integration. And some of the things that I think are going to be important for us will be around trade facilitation and, of course, how we improve the business environment. You change for me, please. So let me speak a little bit about the Caribbean Settlements Network and how I see this playing out for us in the region. But before I get there, remember that slide I showed you with the 4 quadrants of the challenges that we're experiencing in the Caribbean. This slide is an attempt to summarize how I think we need to build resilience. Now, every time I put up this slide, I have to explain what we are attempting to do here. I think as a region, we need to step back in order to jump further. Now, I admit that it is only every 4 years or so that's when I look at athletics. That's when the Olympics comes around. And that is when I'm amazed that when I look at a long jumper, I say, well, I know that person is trying to jump really far. Why are they stepping back? You know, they're always rocking back. And I say, wow, they are stepping back in order to jump further. It's like when you're trying to build that skyscraper, you know, for 2 years you're going in what seems to be the wrong direction. As you build that foundation, and I guess with technology it doesn't take 2 years now, it's probably taking a few months. But you have to step back in order to jump further and to build that higher skyscraper. And so there's a little photo here where for the race, I'm saying that, you know, maybe that person there with that rubber band around them might be Usain Bolt. And I think as a Caribbean, we got to step back so that we can run faster and jump further than anyone else. And so today, as I speak about the Caribbean Settlements Network, I'm just going to focus a little bit on strong, resilient financial sector, regional payments facilitation, conditional cash transfers to the most vulnerable, and climate change adaptation tools. At the bottom of this slide, I have some cross-cutting themes that are really important. Regional integration, which I will touch on. Well, gender equality. I think I've spoken about that, where I'm now saying that digital is queen, digital flow is queen. Statistics, digitalization, and of course, implementation. Can I just have the next slide, please? So where does the Caribbean Settlement Network fit into this? Now, I think that the CSN can assist us with all of these facets. On human and social development, and here I'm speaking also about digital currencies, we want a welfare system that is targeted to individuals and households that really need it. I'm getting a cue there that I only have 5 minutes. I think I need a little bit more time. I hope, Marla, you will give me that permission. How are we to target our social interventions to those who really need it? I think that governments can do this if we were to move towards some form of digital currency and payments facilitation. Just go back 1 second for me. On economic integration with the CSME, I think that without a doubt, the Caribbean Settlements Network can assist us with this. For far too long, we have been hearing about the need to facilitate trade, and sometimes we come up against frictions in the system. And I think having some type of digital payment system would allow us to improve the workings of the integration system. And of course, we have foreign policy coordination and security. Let me move on. So let me give you an example as to how this could work. So take, for example, trade between St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Barbados. Currently, St. Vincent and the Grenadines exports about 15% or so of its total goods and services to Barbados. 15%. And if you continue. In the reverse, when we're talking about importers and exports here, Bajan importers send around US $6 million back to St. Vincent because they're also exporting goods, importing goods from St. Vincent into Barbados. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see here, there's a lot of trade going on between these economies. Now, if you think about it, all of these transactions now are perhaps going through the US banking system. If you think about it, a lot of these transactions don't need to. It's maybe about only 2 to 6 million when we think about who has to settle up at the end of the financial year, with that trade surplus between St. Vincent and Barbados, that's what needs to be settled. There's a lot of the transactions that are currently happening that we are sending money through US correspondent banks. And of course, 2% is taken off if you're using credit cards. So there's a lot of transaction costs there. And what we're saying here is that, let's wake up. Why are we giving away money when we don't need to? And so what we have started, and we had the first meeting at the Caribbean Development Bank, along with colleagues from the private sector, including BIT and Massey as well, and others, including the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, representatives from other central banks. We've decided to look at this issue through a Caribbean Settlements Network to see how we could avoid some of these transaction costs with unnecessary transactions going through our correspondent banks. And I think we're going to be making some headway. So let me just describe this to you. So on this slide on the left, we have a farmer in St. Vincent. Let's say that farmer's name is, I almost said Dorian. Well, let's say that farmer's name is Jill. Jill is selling her products to Barbados. Now, remember I told you about the transactions between St. Vincent and Barbados, and of course, money now being paid from Barbados to St. Vincent. But I want you to think about the other possibilities around this transaction. It's not only about the money being paid from the importer to the exporter, but there are a lot of real-time financial and trade data that will be generated here. And so the reason why I put up this slide is because I want the regulators in the room and the government officials in the room to consider what we call the WIFMs, the what's in it for me. To the regulators and the government officials in the room, through these digital transactions, we can also ensure that perhaps your taxes are paid immediately and on time. Think about that. So there's a lot of benefit in this, not only for the seller of the product, for the buyer of the product, but also for the third parties, tax authorities, the central bank. And I'm going to describe that a little bit more in detail soon. So just now, here's how we see a digital payment system working. And it's quite some simple slides, but I'm trying to just put these points across to you. So customers make payments digitally. Here's what happens. Of course, as you make that payment, the supplier receives their payment. Now, if you were paying an invoice of some sort, you would have a breakdown of the charges that you're paying for the goods or services that you are buying, but also the relevant taxes that you're paying. Now, for the government officials in this room, think about it. If at the point of that sale and at the point of that transaction, you also receive your VAT at the same time as the merchant is receiving their payment. Now, of course, it means that doing VAT returns and so becomes so much easier. And that can be netted out in real time, almost on a daily basis. So the point I want to make here is that while there are benefits to the buyers and the suppliers, there are also significant benefits for the regulators in moving us towards digital currencies, and I think ultimately the Caribbean Settlements Network. Move around. So here's another slide where I know as we speak about digital, I'm also saying that this could work at the point of sale terminals if you are maybe not too familiar with using your phones for payments and you still want to use cards, for example. You can have the payments occurring, and as those payments occur, the VAT payments are going to the tax authorities. The central bank is certainly aware in real time about what's happening with respect to money. And let me just make this point. With respect to central bank monetary policy can become so much more effective through digital currencies, because if there is a reduction in interest rates by the central bank, those reductions can hit the consumers almost immediately. Now, for bankers in the room, I know that that's a little bit of a challenge that you're going to have to come to terms with, but this is the reality of what we are looking at. We are likely to remove some of the intermediation and make our transactions so much more effective. So move on, please. I think I can skip this slide because I want to get to it. Now, so why is the time right for us now to move towards some type of digital payment system and Caribbean Settlements Network? Well, you know, when we look at it, internet penetration rates are really improving across the Caribbean. So the yellow dot there is what I want you to focus on. And in 2017, we have a higher percentage of individuals using the internet than the world average. That's good. We're probably a little bit below the Americas, so I think I see my IDB friends in the room. I think we have some work to do here. But as you can see, there's a real range of where some of our countries are. So moving towards digital is quite easy for us now because of the amount of internet usage that we have. Move on, please. And what's good for us in the region is that the cost of accessing broadband services is quite reasonable now. You can move along, please. So let me just complete this presentation now by speaking about digital for Caribbean development. Now, as we see it, moving towards digital currencies and the Caribbean Settlements Network can assist us in a number of areas. The free movement of capital is certainly one benefit. Reduced transaction costs, faster and convenient transfers. This fourth one, I think, is an area that we don't pay particular attention to. Now, if you are engaged in some type of digital transactions, you are now a member of a growing network. With that growing network, it means that your customer base is increased significantly. I think that this is a benefit that we don't speak about enough. And so I think in real time, many more people will be attracted to digital transactions because of this network effect. And of course, the final one here, I think, is improved financial inclusion. As we know, there are many people within the region who don't have access to credit. And I know that, we deal a lot with commercial banks, And when you go to a commercial bank and you're asking for credit, they are asking for data that maybe a lot of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises don't have. But what we're saying now that if digital transactions were utilized, then the real data on credit scores can be accessed in real time. I don't need to show you profit and loss accounts if you can see from my digital transactions that I've been paying my suppliers on time for many months and for many years. And that's a true measure of a true credit score. Move on, please. So using a CSN network, I think we can have all of these things that I've spoken about. Can speed up trade payments. Using digital currency will make it easier to track cash flows. The taxman will feel satisfied. And I'm just putting a last point there that when we think about the devastation in Bahamas, if we had some type of a Caribbean settlements network, getting resources to the people in Bahamas would be very easy. Over the last week, I've been seeing on WhatsApp groups people asking, how do I get money to the people who need it? And if I give to this particular charity, will it get to the people who really need it? I'm saying perhaps if we had some CSN, you don't have to worry about that. We can get that money to them right away. And move along, please. And here, of course, are some benefits to the retailer in Barbados, which I have already spoken about, and I don't need to say anything more. And of course, I've spoken about the particular benefits to the regulators and perhaps the central bank authorities and the tax authorities. Now, this is my last slide. And I just want to say something about this. I said at the beginning of the presentation that I was away on some study leave, and I was reminded that culture eats strategy for breakfast every time. We know that. You try to do some reorganization in an organization, and the norms, the culture will kill that strategy. Now, I think it's important for us to remember we need to avoid culture eating digital for breakfast. So in addition to how I think BIT have gone about working with the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, which is really a public-private partnership, I think we have to ensure that our governments and regulators are on board. And so we have a process here which I think is important for us to consider as we try to move our societies towards a digital future. And here's the 8 steps to delivery on digital. I think first of all, we need to ensure that our cabinets are online, and they see this as a priority. Then finally, we need to have some type of planning labs, whereby how are we going to move our countries towards that digital future? We need to bring the best people in the room for maybe two weeks or so and come up with implementation plans. Third, I think it's important for us, while all of us in here are probably singing to the converted here, we need to have some open days where we say to the rest of the people in our countries, why are we moving towards the digital? But we also need to hear back from them about some of their concerns so that we take those on board. Fourth, we need to have some roadmap after we have taken account of those interventions from the public. 5, we have some KPI targets as to where we want to be on our digital roadmap within a year, within 2, within 3 years. And then we need to have, and I'm going to say to you, I think we need to have some type of a delivery unit in government that is focused on digitalization. That is their primary focus, trying to help us move along those roadmaps to achieve the KPIs. The last 2 steps here I think are important. We need to always report back to our populations about where we're moving along the digital spectrum. Come back to them on December 31st and explain to them where we have gone, where we said we were going on January the 2nd. If we have not achieved the KPIs, then we have to explain to them what we are going to be doing differently to achieve those KPIs in the near term. So ladies and gentlemen, I've just tried to summarize what I think are some of the aspects of digital currencies and the Caribbean Settlements Network and what importance that could mean for us here for the Caribbean development. And just remind you Let us not allow our culture to eat digital for breakfast. Let us try to also bring our people along as we move towards this new future. Thank you very much.